let's jump right into this one, guys. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're dissecting a fascinating piece of research that totally flips the script on something that frankly touches almost all of our lives, cancer. Now, for decades, we've kind of looked at it as a static genetic error, right? Like a broken machine that just went off the rails. But the research we're unpacking today argues we need to scrap that idea entirely. Instead, we've got to look at it as a dynamic, desperate survival process. To really wrap our heads around this paradigm shift, we're going to hit 6 key areas. First, the flawed genetic paradigm, followed by cancer as a survival process. Then we'll track the cell's journey through 3 stages. Stage 1, a new aim. Stage 2, niche construction. And Stage 3, chaotic response. Finally, we'll wrap up with redirecting the creative process. All right, starting off with Section 1, the flawed genetic paradigm. Let's briefly revisit the somatic mutation theory, which is pretty much the classic textbook way we were all taught to understand this disease. So for the longest time, the name of the game has been genetic determinism. You know the drill. Find a mutation in a specific gene and then design a targeted therapy, a quote-unquote magic bullet to just strike it down. But the reality in the clinic? Well, it's brutal. As many patients know all too well, these therapies almost always fail eventually. Tumors are incredibly heterogeneous and they just keep adapting. So it begs the question, what if the reason these targeted therapies inevitably fail is because we're totally misunderstanding what we're actually fighting? Like, are we fighting a broken machine, or are we fighting a desperate survivor? This is where we need a massive fundamental shift in how we look at biology. The old view basically treats cancer as a deterministic typo. It assumes the tumor is just this passive, static entity sitting there waiting to be obliterated by our drugs. But the new view, it tells a completely different story. It says we absolutely have to see cancer as a dynamic, resilient cellular population that is actively fighting to maintain its own internal order against a super hostile environment. It's fighting the pull of entropy, literally just like any other living thing out there. Which brings us to Section 2, cancer as a survival process. To really grasp this kind of dynamic adaptability, we're pulling from process philosophy to reframe cancer as an ongoing state of becoming. Okay, to get this, we've got to introduce a heavy-hitting philosophical term from Alfred North Whitehead, concrescence. Honestly, it just means the dynamic process of becoming concrete. The idea here is that reality is made of dynamic processes, not just static clumps of stuff. Every single healthy cell in your body goes through this. It creatively integrates data from its past and its environment so it can function. But cancer? Cancer represents a pathological concrescence. It's a wayward, chaotic form of creativity driven by a totally disconnected cell. So it's not a static thing. It's an active, creative process of becoming. And that leads us straight to the subjective aim, basically the internal purpose, or the telos, of a cell. Listen, a cancer cell isn't some mindless zombie acting out a broken genetic script. It actually has a subjective aim. And that aim is driven by a deep, incredibly desperate desire to live and find a new homeostasis. Why? Because severe stress has completely severed it from the healthy tissue's integrated social order. It is lacking that crucial feedback from the organism. It's totally isolated, so it literally has to define its own purpose just to survive. So how does this actually play out over time? Well, we can track this isolated cell as it adapts to a hostile environment across 3 really distinct stages. Let's look at Section 3, Stage 1, a new aim. This is the moment where carcinogenic stress completely shatters the healthy cell's alignment with the rest of the body. There's a brilliant Whitehead quote that anchors this whole concept. Creativity is the ultimate causality. When a cell gets hammered by genetic damage, chronic inflammation, or metabolic stress, it doesn't just automatically break down and die. Instead, it grasps or prehends this massive disruption. It uses its inherent biological creativity to forge a brand new purpose. Faced with complete isolation and unrelenting stress, the cell basically goes rogue. It becomes a desperate survivor, completely breaking away from the organism's integrated social order. Before, its aim was to serve the whole body, right? But now it decides its new goal is self-preservation at absolutely any cost. This huge shift in its final cause, that is the true inception of the cancerous process. Moving on to Section 4, Stage 2, niche construction. Because once it's locked into this deviant aim, the newly formed cancer cell essentially becomes a rogue architect.
This tumor cell doesn't just sit there, it actively transforms its environment. It co-opts normal, local fibroblasts and turns them into cancer-associated ones to help it grow. It actively educates your immune cells to just ignore it, creating this tolerogenic safe haven. It even hijacks angiogenesis to build its very own custom blood supply. It is importing energy and exporting entropy to construct a supportive, pathological society centered entirely on its own survival. It's literally synthesizing the local tissue into a brand new ecosystem.
Which takes us to Section 5, Stage 3, Chaotic Response. And guys, this explains exactly why cancer is so unbelievably resistant to our modern targeted therapies. When we look at cancer genomes and how they respond to our drugs, we usually see extreme unpredictability. We see total chaos. But instead of dismissing that chaos as just random, meaningless noise, we have to realize it's actually a highly creative, non-deterministic survival strategy. Sure, random behavior might look like a totally low-probability solution to us, but it's a fundamental expression of that Whiteheadian creativity. It's a desperate play to ensure survival when the integrated order fails. It is an active, adaptive response to an incredibly hostile environment. And we see this play out in the clinic every single day. When you hit a tumor with a highly toxic therapy, its response isn't just pre-programmed. It is actively creative. It might upregulate efflux pumps, activate bypass signaling pathways, or even hide out in a drug-tolerant state. Therapy resistance isn't some unfortunate bug in the system. It's the highly creative manifestation of the tumor adapting. Even metastasis is just the spatial dissemination of this exact same creative process. Cells trying to conquer a distant organ just to build a new safe harbor. Finally, Section 6, Redirecting the Creative Process. So where does all of this leave us? How does our approach to treatment need to evolve? Well, it demands a total paradigm shift. Right now, our main goal is eradication. We're waging a war of annihilation against what we assumed was a static entity. But if cancer is actually a dynamic, creative process, we've got to shift toward redirection. We have to anticipate and manage resistance as an absolute inevitability. This is where strategies like adaptive therapy come in, deliberately modulating treatment pressure to manage and suppress resistant clones. It embodies this whole new philosophy. We have to treat the entire relational network, not just blindly attack an isolated cell. Because at the end of the day, cancer is fundamentally a dark, pathological expression of the exact same creativity that underpins all of life. We can't, and really shouldn't, try to destroy creativity itself, because it's the ultimate engine of biology. Since cancer is driven by this desperate desire to live, we have to ask ourselves, what if we treat cancer by outmaneuvering, destabilizing, and redirecting life's inherent creativity rather than fruitlessly trying to destroy it? It is a massive conceptual leap from fighting a thing to managing a process, and it might just be the most essential next step in understanding our own biology. Thanks for hanging out with me on The Explainer today, and keep questioning what you think you know.